it's a big week for Indian diplomacy. Prime Minister Modi is going to be here in New York as well as in Washington, D.C. For the first time in 9 years under his prime ministership, he's going to be invited for a state visit. Two critical issues, geopolitical issues, that are going to dominate the conversation. One, of course, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Remember, the Ukrainian president has also reached out to India to play some kind of a mediator role to try and use its leverage, use its influence with President Putin in Russia to try and broker some kind of a ceasefire. That is definitely going to be a topic of conversation when Prime Minister Modi and US President Biden meet. And they will be meeting over multiple occasions through the course of this week. There is a private dinner that's going to happen Wednesday night. And then, of course, on Thursday night, there is the state banquet as well. He will also get a chance to interact with Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. That's going to be over a working lunch on Friday. But the Russia-Ukraine war is a very, very big backdrop for this conversation. And also remember, India is hosting the big G20 summit in early September. So it's going to be something that is absolutely critical because the joint communique solely depends, or to a great extent depends, on all 20 countries being able to agree on the language and the texting of the joint communique. Remember last year in Bali, in Indonesia, when that country hosted the G20, the negotiations went on for a number of hours, and finally at the nth hour, they were able to negotiate a draft that was acceptable to all countries, including, of course, to Russia and to China. Whereas this year, in the previous meetings that we have seen, whether it was the foreign ministers meeting that happened in Delhi back in March, or whether it was the finance ministers meeting that happened in Bangalore, the G20 leaders were not able to arrive at a consensus on the draft language, particularly vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine war. In fact, the External Affairs Minister said on 99% of the issues we had agreement, we had consensus. There was one issue which we could not, and that, of course, was the Russia-Ukraine war. The other big issue of discussion will be, of course, China. India has its own internal problems with China vis-a-vis what happened from April 2020 with Galwan and the change of the status quo, as it were. And of course, that is something that India is dealing with. It's pushing back against Chinese aggression at the line of actual control, but also in the wider Indian Ocean region. India is, of course, an active member of the Quad. We recently had the Quad leaders meeting that happened on the sidelines of the G7 in Hiroshima. But how can the Quad be more actualized in terms of preparedness for any kind of a military confrontation? Not necessarily between these four countries and China, but for example on Taiwan, where for China, they consider it a core interest of theirs, but at the same time, the rhetoric has been raised to such a high level by the Chinese that it seems like, and this is the perception amongst geopolitical experts and geostrategy experts, that it might be difficult for Xi Jinping not to be seen as taking some kind of a proactive, maybe even a military measure to try and reunify Taiwan. And he'll have to do that before the end of his current tenure. So all of this will form the backdrop, geopolitical backdrop certainly, when conversations happen between US President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi during the course of this diplomatic visit.